All right, hello everybody coming in. My name is Allie. I'm going to be doing a little bit on Wi-Fi tonight and why it is important. So we're going to be understanding how much your internet connection really matters. There is quite a bit that you can do with the internet. So I've got some highlights here. So we're going to talk about what is internet. We're going to go over the difference between modems and routers, different devices that use the internet, what your speeds mean, and then just some of the basic hardware stuff, kind of breaking down the modems and routers a little bit. So first off is, what is the internet? All right, so think of the internet as basically one giant computer that runs every connected device in the world. So the entirety of the internet is controlled by a server that's connected with cables to more servers that transmit your data to and from your devices. One way to think about it and how fast it actually transfers your information, the technical term is 5 exabytes a day. I had to look up what an exabyte was because that is crazy, but it's equivalent to 40,000 2-hour standard definition movies per every second. So that's kind of crazy how fast the internet actually transmits that data and stuff like that, especially with all that we do with it every day. So the difference between modems and routers. So your modem is your base device for getting the internet in your home. It's the bridge that communicates from your provider to your home. And then depending on what that provider uses, there's different ways that it can actually connect into your home. So an easy breakdown of that one is modems are what gets the internet to your house. Again, the different companies use different things. Some things are better than others. It just depends on which company you end up going with. Like in Omaha here, Cox and CenturyLink use 2 entirely different types. And then both of them have like a little bit more of a premier thing that use also a different type of connection to get it into your home. Routers are the communication from your modem to your devices. It can be a tethered connection, so you can use like an actual Ethernet cable, or it can be a wireless connection as well. So your router, the primary use that people use it for is to get Wi-Fi in your home. So your modem brings in your internet signal, and a router will push out your Wi-Fi. So if you don't need Wi-Fi, you can use just a modem, but if you need Wi-Fi, you have to have both of them. Now, if you use like the provider equipment, they tend to have it built in together. There are versions of them where the modem and the router is one unit. It's usually recommended that you do them separately, and we'll kind of go over that as we go on here. So, what devices use the internet? There are actually quite a few. Obviously not everything listed there. I listed quite a bit. But the most important question when you are looking to buy a new router or figure out what you need to make everything you want to do work in your home, it's to ask yourself, how many devices will I be connecting to my Wi-Fi? So as you see in the list here, there's smart TVs, streaming devices, gaming consoles, computers, tablets, cell phones. Smart home products are getting super, super popular these days. So your security cameras and your video doorbell, all of that's going to connect. And then there's even smart appliances these days. There's Samsung fridges that have screens in them that you can watch Netflix on. Washers and dryers can now connect to the Wi-Fi, so you can start them from your phone. So there is more and more things that are going to be connecting to the Wi-Fi going forward, which is why it's really important to know that you're going to have the hardware that you need to make sure you're getting everything working the way you want it to. You also need to keep in mind that you need to know how many of each device you're going to have as well. A lot of people these days have multiple TVs, they have multiple streaming, they have multiple tablets and phones. So keeping that in mind as well, because that will use more bandwidth. So how do you know which speed you need? What you need to pay attention to is your download and upload speeds. So your download speed is how quickly your internet connection can retrieve data from the internet. So things like web pages, videos, cat photos, how fast you're able to access that. Your upload speed is how quickly your internet connection can send data from your devices to the internet. So uploading your video to YouTube, sending documents via email, stuff like that. So if you want to know where to start, some good examples, and you don't need to break everything down number by number, but just to kind of get an idea of how much different things use. HD streaming only uses about 5 megabytes per second. 4K streaming, though, is probably the most important one that you want to make sure that you have a good router for, because that one takes about 25 megabytes per second. And again, that gives on how good of an actual Wi-Fi signal that you have. Gaming, working from home is a big jump because it depends if you're doing a lot of video calls or if you're just sending emails, writing documents. So megabits per second is kind of how we gauge internet speeds. It represents bandwidth, which is how much data can be transferred each second. Now keep in mind, I have a little chart here to kind of show you a breakdown. So this, the numbers are estimated per device. So if you are talking to CenturyLink or Cox and you're like, I want to know what plan I need that's going to be good for what I do. This chart here is based on a 100 megabyte plan, which is a kind of in between. It's not usually their starter point, but it's usually like a step up from that when it comes to their plans. There'll be some variations, but if you look, you're doing some 4K streaming. Let's say your spouse is working with video calls, you have kids gaming, some kids are just watching TV, security cameras. You can see that that uses pretty much your entire megabits per second. So you actually want to make sure you have a little bit more than the 100 megabits. So going up to 150, or usually the next one's 300 megabits per second, not $300. So when it breaks that down, if you have the little bit extra speeds, it is going to just kind of make sure you have that little bit of a wiggle room so that you're not just using up all of your speeds. And then as you use up your speeds, so let's say you have all of this going all at once, even if you don't have it at once, it's actually still important because a lot of stuff that's connected to the Wi-Fi is going to be doing updates and stuff like that in the background. So just because it's not actively being used doesn't mean that it's not using your Wi-Fi. So with that, if you have all of this running and let's say you bring someone else over and they've got a couple cell phones and they're kind of messing around on the internet, your signal's going to drop pretty drastically and it's going to be hard for everything to stay connected to the internet. Your router itself will actually prioritize different things. So it might actually lower your cell phone signal to the Wi-Fi while making sure the 4K streaming is getting all the bandwidth and stuff like that. So when you are thinking of looking at upgrading your modem and your router, these are kind of the main 3 questions that anyone's going to ask you, whether you go to Best Buy and the salesperson is asking you, or you go to the company itself. They're going to kind of break this down. Now, when it comes to your modem, the biggest thing is to find out what provider uses. So CenturyLink uses what's called DSL. That's going to look like your phone jack. It's going to attach to the phone jack in the wall. And then Cox, for example, here in Omaha, will use cable, which is like your coaxial cable, like old TVs used to use for antennas. Cable does transmit faster signals, so it is technically better, but some providers don't use that. It is, with a router, there's that series of questions. So those 3 questions right here are kind of the main breakdown. What signal does my provider use was your modem. How many devices are on my network, which we kind of talked about there. And then how large is my home? A small home like an apartment really isn't going to need as much strength as someone with a 3,000-foot home. Multiple levels and what your walls are made of can also deteriorate the signal passing through. So if you have cement walls or wood grain, usually doesn't do a whole lot, but usually it's like cement, tin roofing. If you're, for example, using Wi-Fi out in a shed, or you have an older house that has the tin roofing, that will also deteriorate your signal. So you want to make sure that you're paying attention to those kind of things as well. Now the different types of routers here. Wi-Fi 4 is kind of where we're at in terms of the lower end, and that's even being phasing out at the moment. So you're not going to see a lot of those. You're mainly going to see those ones if you haven't upgraded your tech in a couple years, especially if you're using like the provider hardware that they give you. They were not made for most of the stuff that we use today. They were made for your Windows 95 computer back in the day, and that was pretty much all we had that connected to the internet. So they tend to be pretty slow, and they can't hold a lot of devices, as you can see with like the little number of people down here. If there is an N at the front of the technology number, so you'll see either on the box of the product or on the bottom of the product itself, it will say N300, N600. That is how you know that that's a Wi-Fi 4 router. Usually if you have one of those, you're going to want to upgrade, especially if you still don't even really do a lot with your internet. Chances are if you're running more than 1 or 2 devices, you're going to want to upgrade to something a little bit faster to make sure that you can keep everything up to date. Wi-Fi 5 routers is kind of where we're at right now. They're the most common. Providers are giving those ones right now. They can handle more devices at once. You can see with the little people down there. And it's made for more modern use. Holding more devices means you can have your cell phones on there. You can have people playing video games, watching 4K Netflix, stuff like that. And it's not going to deteriorate too bad. You're not really limited. They probably have the widest selection of stuff when it comes to those ones. And if you're doing just basic stuff, computer usage, watching some Netflix, and you don't have a whole lot of like smart home stuff, or you're not like streaming video games, or 4K Netflix gets kind of iffy depending on which one that you are, which type of Wi-Fi router that you're using. Those ones themselves can actually, you'll see and know if your router is a Wi-Fi 5, because that technology number that we talked about with the Wi-Fi 4 will have an AC in the front of it. And then that number that's behind it, so AC 1900, AC 2300, that is essentially just the range and the power that it'll have. So if you're upgrading, you do the basic stuff. Most people want to stick around like a Wi-Fi, or not a Wi-Fi, AC 1900. Probably get away with like a good 1750, which you can get at pretty much any store. And those will be pretty good for your basic stuff. If you are adding in a little bit of smart home stuff and stuff like that, you might want to jump up to some of the higher numbers just to make sure you're getting that signal strength. Another thing to keep in mind with going with the higher powered routers is they also add another level of security to your internet. So if you want a little extra protection to make sure that people can't get into your network, a lot of routers do provide that kind of built in these days. So that's really good as well. Now, mesh systems are actually some of my favorite things. They are super new technology. They're going to run in, I think I totally skipped over Wi-Fi 6, so we're gonna go back real quick. Haha. All right, Wi-Fi 6. Real quick, that's a newer technology. It's not super used right now. There's not a lot of stuff that can use it, but essentially it can hold more devices at one time without slowing down any of your speeds. You'll know it's Wi-Fi 6 if it has an AX at the beginning of it. They are good going forward, but as of right now, most people can get away with a Wi-Fi 5 and they'll be fine. So now going back into mesh systems, which are my favorite, they're essentially just a new type of router. They can be Wi-Fi 5 or Wi-Fi 6. So it's just kind of another step to think about. Now I figured out Wi-Fi 5 is probably good for me, so now I need to look at what kind of Wi-Fi 5 do I want. If you have a larger home, or you have a home that we talked about with the different types of walls and stuff like that, you are going to probably want to look at a Wi-Fi or a mesh system, just because that's kind of what they're made for. As you can see in the little picture here, you put, it comes with satellites. You've got your main router and then you've got your satellites. They will connect together through what's called a back channel. So your Wi-Fi signal is one signal that it puts out, but it also puts out a secondary signal that only communicates with these different satellites. That way, like you can see on the diagram here, you've got the two different signals that it's pushing out, and it's still going to be the same internet strength, same everything like that. You're basically running multiple routers that can talk to each other. So big homes, having it on one side of the home versus the other, especially if you're streaming 4K on both sides of the room, or you've got your security cameras everywhere. I hear a lot about people that maybe have a barn that's a little bit of a way, or a shed that they work out of that they want internet out to because they play a TV while they work or listen to music. So making sure that you can get signal throughout your entire home is definitely where you would want to look there. So if you're looking to figure out where on your router for the information for that technology number, it should be on the bottom. There should be a, normally it's on the bottom, there's a sticker that will kind of go over like the serial number and stuff like that. It should say on that sticker, whether it's AN or an N, or ACNAX. So it should just be on this little sticker. But other than that, you've got that dedicated connection for the mesh systems and stuff like that. They also do increase your security with those as well. For example, with the mesh systems, I do live in an apartment, but I do have a mesh system as well. I've actually got the one pictured right there, the Orbi, and it is a night and day difference between just the regular router that I was using before. We've got quite a few computers in my apartment. We're kind of a big technology household. We just obviously don't have security cameras and doorbells because we're an apartment, but literally we don't have any droppage. Our speeds don't go down at all. I have a lot of the newer routers and mesh systems. You'll have an app that you can use on your phone. So like I can see who's on my Wi-Fi. I can set passwords for my guests, so they're not using my password. So once they leave, I can shut off the guest Wi-Fi, and that way they don't have access to my Wi-Fi anymore. So you just get added security with a lot of the updated stuff, which is really nice, especially since a lot of people are concerned about security. So that pretty much is a simple breakdown of this. Obviously, if anybody has questions, I can definitely answer. But other than that, mine was pretty good breakdown, or pretty simple, I think. But yeah, if you guys have any questions, now is the time to ask them in the last few minutes here. See that there was a hand raised. Are you able to type in the chat? So that's a good one. Linda, how frequently do you need to replace your modem and router? Now your modem, you really don't need to replace that often. Those can last 10, 15 years. Your router, on the other hand, it's usually recommended every 3 to 5 years. The main reason being our technology just changes so fast, and more things coming out that use a Wi-Fi signal. And as more things come out, they're gonna need to upgrade the routers to make sure they can handle all of that. So every 3 to 5 years for a router modem. If you do purchase a modem outside of the company that you're getting your service with. Modems can run you $100 for a pretty decent one. If you are looking at a router, those can vary from, I would say, 120 for the bottom range that you're going to want to get, all the way up to, I mean, a couple hundred. So it really just depends what you're going for. And then Donald, the numbers that identify a Wi-Fi 4, that was N. So if it has an N in the front of it, that will be Wi-Fi 4. The Apple ones are a little bit different. I don't know if they actually broke those ones down to the like NAC and stuff. They kind of ran on their, they still use the same technology, but they worded it a little differently. You might want to, if you can find a sticker that has maybe a model number on it, kind of look up and see which router that is, and it'll probably tell you through the model number as well. A little extra work, but it's a way that you can get it. No stickers on it. And I'm not 100% sure with the router ones. I know they don't make them anymore. So I personally, I recommend upgrading from the Apple ones because they were known not to work super well. Now you can go through the provider to upgrade your stuff. You can buy online. I would go, if you want something a little bit more in person, either talk to your provider, run to Best Buy or NFM. If you live in the Omaha area, those, you can get a lot of specialists that can help out there. If you do have a combo unit and you want to do a separate one, it is recommended that way. Just because running 2 separate units, it's not one processor running both. So it is recommended, yeah, you would need to replace both, but keep in mind once you replace that modem, it'll be a while before you need to replace it again. Yes, Richard, since you have Cox and it drops during a Zoom meeting, you have an N router. That is most likely just because the N routers weren't really made for the video chatting and stuff like that. So I would look into getting something a little bit better. Something like depending on how many devices you have, again, like we talked about, but something simple like a Wi-Fi 5 AC 1900 would probably run pretty good for you, and it'll make a night and day difference between your Zoom meetings too. So with Troy, real quick, you have an inverter for your solar panels. So if it's producing its own Wi-Fi signal, it's hard to tell how strong that signal is. I would think that it's probably not super great just because it's not really made for just the Wi-Fi. I could totally be wrong on that, but there is ways that you can boost the Wi-Fi signal. You can do something like a Wi-Fi booster. Now those depend on the speeds that you have from your provider for your actual internet signal. So if you don't have a super good actual internet signal coming in, let's say you pay for like the cheapest plan with them, that booster isn't gonna really help give you a better Wi-Fi signal. Now something like the mesh systems, that will definitely help, especially since you mentioned you do have thick walls of your house. So that would be a good one for that. And then Robert asked about the dual band routers. The dual band routers are good for, basically, they kind of do what the mesh systems do, where it speaks on a back channel to each of those dual bands. So you have one that is going to push out a lower signal than the other one. One's a 5 megabits, one's a 2.5 or 2.4. When you go through those two, your 5 you're going to want to keep for, and you can access all these settings. If you talk to your provider, they can show you how to access these settings. The 5 is going to be better for, like, you're going to want to use that for your streaming, things that are going to take up more of your signal. Your lower one, your 2.4, I would keep for cell phones, computers that do like basic stuff. So I use mine for my cell phones, my 2.4 for all my cell phones, guests that come over, whereas my husband streams games, so I save the stronger signal for them. Tri-band, if you jump up to that one, will do pretty much the same thing, except you have 2 of the 5 and 1 of the 2.4. With an AC router, will you get less buffering? You will if you're going over an N router, or if you're getting a higher level AC router than what you currently have. You're going to want to make sure also that you're getting good speeds through your provider as well. So it's not always just the router. You also want to check what you're paying for. With everything I do in my house, I did have to up my speeds from 80 to 300. Honestly, it was only a $20 difference. So it's not always as much more expensive than you think it is. So definitely checking with your provider if you're experiencing any problems would probably be your first step. Make sure you're getting pretty decent speeds. I usually don't recommend going with the lowest one just because it's really not made for the stuff we do these days. What brand? I use what's called the Orbi mesh system. Let me see if I can go back to that slide to show you a picture of it. So it's these 3 guys right there. I could have one in my living room, one is in my roommate's room because that's the other part of the house we use the most internet. For future routers, I personally recommend Netgear if you're going with like just your standard router and not a mesh system. They tend to have a little bit better security. They're a little bit more popular. Price is usually pretty good on them as well. If you want to look into mesh systems, the Orbi would be the one that I recommend. Eero is another brand that's really good. And the newest Google Wi-Fi is actually really good as well. So those 3 for the mesh. When it comes to the regular systems, you're pretty much limited to Netflix and Linksys if you want the most variety. So I would stick with Netflix, Netgear myself, just because that added security is a feature that I really like. No, so the Orbi is stationary. So you just keep them in the room that they're in. They have a couple ports, so if I want to hardwire my computer, which will give you a little bit better signal as well, that's something that I can do. But yeah, you don't need to move them around. You don't need to put them like every time you leave a room. They'll just stay where they're at, and they just plug into a wall, and then they plug into the main one will plug into your modem. The other ones just need power to the wall. All right. Let me see here. Sorry, I didn't see the questions in this other chat. I'll answer a couple of them and then we'll end the webinar here. So going to Melanie's really quick, the square footage for a non-mesh system, it really depends. Now, the non-mesh systems can be pretty powerful. They usually go up to like a 3,000 number there. So if you're looking at the box, that's why I'm listing all the numbers. So if you look at the box, you just look for the 3,000, AC 3,000. That would be probably for a pretty large home. And I'm talking closer to that 3,000 square foot, somewhere in there. That does a pretty decent amount with their Wi-Fi. So lots of TVs, maybe some security cameras. Again, the walls would depend on that signal, but if you have one of those and they work fine for you, like absolutely. Usually once you start getting into the bigger square footage, they start recommending the mesh systems, just because with the regular Wi-Fi 5, there is a limit, or there's not like a defined limit, but there's always a higher chance that you're going to experience dead zones. Cell phone honestly only uses about 10 megabits per second. They don't really use that much. The mesh system that I have is, the mesh systems are going to be a little bit more expensive. Mine does run, I think, between 250 and 300. Most of them will be around that price range. They do have different levels of their speeds as well, just like the AC with the 1750 and 1900. Like they're going to have that as well. I have a pretty standard one. I believe mine is 2300, which is pretty good. I'm set for whenever I move into a house. I'm good to go. Now the Google Wi-Fi is about 250. That's a pretty good price range for what they give you. Plaster is not really going to degrade the signal a whole lot. It's usually pretty good about making sure it can still pass through. And then for the actual square footage, there's really no set square footage. If you have less than 700 square feet, honestly, you would be absolutely fine with just a regular Wi-Fi 5 router. You probably wouldn't need a mesh for something like that. Depending on if you have any like security cameras and stuff like that, you'll probably be okay with something like the 1900, that base one that I've talked about. That one will probably be just fine for running some stuff like that. If you have security cameras, jump up a little bit, or video doorbells or anything. But if you're just using TV, computer, cell phones, you're good. All right. Are there any other questions before we are done? Then from there, we will end it for today. That's about it. That is it then, guys. Have a good night. Thanks for coming in to learn a little bit about Wi-Fi. Have a good one.